Her stepmother slid the letter across the counter. It was already signed. Her aunt's hospital bed was gone on Monday, unless Nora married the man who slept behind the building. He never spoke, and nobody asked why. Nora did not beg. She put down a page of her own and told her to sign that one first. Weeks later, 400 people laughed at that man, and 11 men in dark suits bowed. One quick thing before we continue. Subscribe if you want more stories like this, and tell us in the comments where you're listening from tonight. The marble counter was cold enough to feel through a coat sleeve. Vivian Halvorson read the page twice. She held it the way she held everything, by the corner, at a slight distance, as though the paper might be damp. "Where did you have this drawn up?" "The library on Ferris Street," Nora said. "The public terminal. I typed it standing up because the chairs were taken." "It is not enforceable." "Then it costs you nothing." The refrigerator behind the wall shut off, and the kitchen went so quiet that Nora could hear the candle guttering in its glass. Vanilla. Her stepmother bought them by the case. Nora kept her hands where they were, flat on the marble on either side of the paper, because her hands were the part she had never learned to control. She had known that about herself since she was 11 years old, in this same room. In the pocket of her coat, next to nothing else, there was a curl of thin white paper she had forgotten to leave at work. 3 years, Vivian said, reading. Personally guaranteed, regardless of the disposition of the company. Regardless of anything. "And if I do not sign it? Then I do not sign yours, and the buyers walk in 20 days and find a residency clause with my name on it." Nora heard her own voice come out level and was distantly surprised by it. "You cannot sell a building I am allowed to live in. That is the whole of it, isn't it? That is why you have been so patient with me this month." Something moved behind Vivian's face. It was not respect. It was the small, quiet adjustment of a woman finding out that a line item is larger than she budgeted for. She had not been patient. She had been careful, which is a different thing, and cheaper. For 11 years, she had run a company that collected unpaid hospital bills for a fee, and she had learned in the first of those years that the most efficient instrument in the world is a signature obtained without raising your voice. She set the page down. "Your father wrote that clause to protect you." "I know what he wrote it for." "He wrote it because he thought I would put you out." Vivian almost smiled. "I never put you out. You left." "I left at 19, and I have paid my own rent every month since, and you have never once asked me where I live." Nora put one finger on the last line of her own page. "Sign it." Vivian took the pen out of the holder by the telephone. She read the paragraph one more time, and Nora watched her do the arithmetic. And Nora already knew the answer, because she had done the same arithmetic on the walk over. 3 years of a rehabilitation bed was less money than 1 week of delay on a sale of that size. Her stepmother was not a woman who paid for things. She was a woman who compared numbers. She signed. One hard stroke that tore a small furrow in the library paper. Then she pushed the marriage certificate across the marble without looking at it, the way you would return a menu. "Monday," she said. "Both signatures. Or the letter goes out anyway. And we will see how fast the state facility can send a van." Nora picked up her own page first. She folded it along the crease she had already made and put it in her inside pocket, against her chest, where it would stay dry. Then she picked up the certificate. Ruth Bellamy was on the 4th floor of Saint Ambrose, 9 weeks after a stroke, in a rehabilitation bed with a note taped above it in a nurse's handwriting. The note said no thin liquids. Nora had watched 3 different aides read that note before they lifted a cup, which was 3 more than would read it 3 hours away, in a place she could not reach on a night shift.
"One more thing," Vivian said. Nora stopped at the back door. "Do not bring him here. I will need him at the reception on the 9th, in the Rosewood room, standing next to you where the buyers can see there is a household. Before that, I do not want to know what he looks like." "You picked him." "I picked a signature." Vivian folded her napkin into a square and set it beside her plate. "He has no family to ask questions, no money to make demands, and no voice to complain with." "If you had found something better on your own, I would have used that instead." Nora went out into the cold. The Halverson house sat on a rise with a gravel drive, and from the bottom of it, you could see the whole east side of the city laid out, and the lit windows of Saint Ambrose, 4 blocks north, floor by floor, all the way up to the 4th. She stood there for a moment and looked at the 2 blank lines on the certificate. There was a box for a printed name and a line for a signature, and it occurred to her, standing on the gravel with her breath going white, that she had no idea what to write in the box, because she had never asked him. She had brought him a hot meat pie in February. She had asked whether he wanted it warm or cold, and he had pointed at warm. That was the longest conversation they had ever had. She put the certificate inside her coat, next to the folded page and the curl of paper she had forgotten to leave at work, and she walked north. Down the east corridor at St. Ambrose, past the vending machines, the floor stopped being tile and became sealed concrete, and the overhead lights hummed at a slightly different pitch. That was the part of a hospital nobody photographed. 4 payment windows in a row, 3 of them dark after 9 at night. The 4th one lit. Window 4 was 2 paces wide. Scratched plexiglass, a steel tray running underneath it, a speaker grill that made every voice sound like it was coming out of a can. Inside there was a terminal, a printer, a rolling chair with one arm missing, and a steel spike standing upright in a block of wood. On the spike were 4 years of receipts. That was the thing in Nora's coat pocket. One of them from Tuesday that she had not gotten around to filing. It had taken her a long time to work out what they were. The Ward Relief Fund paid off hospital bills for adults who could not pay them. If you qualified, a letter came in the mail saying your balance had been resolved. People carried those letters folded into 8s in their wallets. Some of them cried when they opened them. Then, some of them came to window 4 at 2 in the morning because a collections notice had arrived anyway, and they wanted somebody to explain how both pieces of paper could be about them. Nora would take the letter, key the account, and the screen would show the balance sitting there. Full. Untouched. After 9 at night, she had no authority to zero anything. The one thing the terminal allowed her was an inquiry, and every inquiry printed a receipt. $0. The account number. The grant number from the letter, typed into the memo field. The date and the time down to the minute. The receipt was worthless. It was not a payment. It proved nothing that anybody wanted proved. She put them on the spike anyway. The first one she kept because she could not think what else to do with it. And after that, it stopped being a decision and became a habit. She worked her shift that night and did not tell anyone. And at 1 in the morning, she put her coat on and went out the loading dock door with the certificate in her bag. The dock smelled like steam off the laundry vent and wet cardboard. One caged bulb over the roll-up door, buzzing. Under the tin overhang on a stack of blue pallets, a man sat with his back against the brick. He wore a brown canvas work coat, torn open at the left shoulder. His hair had grown long enough to reach his collar, and a thick dark beard covered most of the lower half of his face. His boots were split across the toe on both sides. The soles were stitched, and the stitching was still tight. Nora knelt down on the concrete in front of him. The cold came through her knees inside 2 seconds. "I need help," she said. He did not look at her. He was turning a bottle cap over in his fingers. Slowly. The way a person does when their hands need something to do. "I need you to marry me." The bottle cap stopped. She got the rest out fast because she had rehearsed it on the walk and she was afraid of losing the order. Paper only. He would not have to live like a husband. He could have the couch or the floor, whichever he wanted. She would buy him a hot meal every day and a coat that closed at the front. Her aunt was on the 4th floor of the building behind him, and a letter was going out on Monday. She put the certificate down on the pallet between them and laid the pen on top of it. He raised his head. His eyes were not what she was braced for. They were not dulled or drifting. They went to her face, then to the paper, then to her knees on the wet concrete, and then back to her face. And she had the brief, unpleasant sensation of being red. He picked up the pen. He wrote in the printed name box, and then on the signature line. And Nora watched the pen move, and felt something small go wrong in her chest, without being able to say what. The letters were even. The spacing was even. The line came off the last letter and stopped clean, the way a signature stops when a man has made it 10,000 times. Silas Ward. "Thank you," she said. "I meant what I said. I will take care of you." He nodded once and looked away. His name was Silas Ward, and the building behind him belonged to him. So did the one across the parking structure, and 39 others in 4 states. He had been on that dock for 11 nights, and in 11 nights, he had not said one word out loud to anybody. He had never once told a person he could not speak. He simply did not correct them. On the 9th night, a security officer had walked the length of the dock with a flashlight and told him he had until the end of the week. A man married to an employee has a reason to be on hospital property. He read the printed name box before he signed. It said Nora Bellamy, and it meant nothing to him at all. She stood up and brushed the grit off her knees. "What do I call you?" she said. "Your first name. I would like to get it right." He took a pencil out of his coat and wrote it in the white margin of a newspaper. 5 letters. He did not write the other one. She said goodnight. When she was gone, he reached inside the lining of his coat and took out a phone that had not been switched on in 11 nights. He looked at it for a while. Then he put it back. The civil room on the 2nd floor of the Ardennes Municipal Building smelled like wet paper and floor wax. Folders and stacks on every flat surface. A wall clock loud enough to hear from the doorway. It took 4 minutes. No flowers, no music, no vows. Nobody asked them to say anything to each other. The clerk turned 3 copies of the same white form around on the desk and pointed at the lines, and they signed, and she stamped them. And that was the marriage. Sable Halverson had her phone up before they reached the hallway. She had been recording since the elevator. She held it out at arm's length with her wrist turned so the ring caught the light, and she pitched her voice to reach the benches at the far end. "So this is happening. My sister got married today. Everybody say congratulations." Then she swung the camera down. She held it on the boots. She got close enough to fill the frame with the split leather across the toe, and she kept it there, steady, the way you hold a shot you know is the good one. Guess where she found him? Comments, go. Nora stepped in front of the lens. Put it away. It is a free hallway. It is a records office, and those are people's files on that desk. Her voice was shaking. She hated that it was shaking, and she did not step back. "We came here to sign a form. That is all your mother needed. There is no reason to film anybody." Vivienne came between them without hurrying. "Lower your voice," she said to Nora. "You have what you wanted. Do not make it expensive." Then she turned to her older daughter, and for one full second, Nora believed her stepmother was about to tell Sable to stop. "Not in the corridor," Vivienne said. "Wait until you are outside." They left. Their heels went away down the marble, and the sound of them lasted a long time. Silas had not moved. He was standing by the radiator with the courthouse pen still in his hand, and Nora watched his fingers close on it, slowly, until there was a small, dry crack somewhere near the clip. He put both halves down on the counter and pushed his hands into his pockets. It was raining when they came out. She did not have taxi money. It was 4 blocks to Fell Street, and she had a folding rain sheet in her bag, the cheap kind that comes sealed in a plastic packet, and she opened it and held it up over his head. She was shorter than him by most of a foot. To keep it over him, she had to hold her arm up and out, and the water ran off the near edge and went straight down the back of her collar. He reached for it once. "You are taller," she said. "It does not work." They walked. The rain came off the awnings in sheets, and the traffic lights ran red and green across the wet street. And by the time they reached the door beside the laundromat, her whole right side was soaked through. There were 3 envelopes jammed in the slot under the buzzers. She pulled them out with 2 fingers and went through them under the awning without letting the rain sheet drop off him. 2 were for the apartment downstairs. The third had a window in it, and a gray strip along the top, and her aunt's name showing through the plastic. She did not open it. She folded it in half, and then in half again, and put it in her coat pocket. And she did it fast, the way you do a thing you would rather nobody standing next to you saw. He watched her do it. 2 flights up, 1 room, and it smelled like detergent and old wood. A 2-burner stove, a wooden chair, a lumpy brown couch, a single bed against the far wall, and a window that looked out at the freight line. She locked the door and stood there, dripping. It is not much, but nobody yells in here. She hung the rain sheet on the doorknob. "Take that off before you get sick." He slid the coat off his shoulders. Underneath, he was not what the coat had been saying about him. His chest and shoulders took up more of that room than she had allowed for, and he stood straight, and she looked away and busied herself with the kettle. She pulled a plastic box out from under the bed. Thread, needles, a folded square of scrap cotton. She sat down on the wooden chair under the lamp and held her hand out for the coat. "I cannot have my husband walking around town with his shoulder open." He handed it over and sat down on the edge of the couch. She threaded black thread on the second try and started on the tear. She talked while she worked, because the room was too quiet otherwise, and because she had spent 6 years talking to people who were separated from her by glass. She told him her family had been cruel to him today. She said her sister only cared about things that caught light. She said she was sorry about the boots, and that she would do something about the boots. Halfway along the seam, the needle hit something that was not cloth. It was down inside the lining on the left side, flat and hard, about the size of a deck of cards. She pressed her thumb over it once through the fabric and felt the edges of it. She did not look up, and she did not ask. She took the needle around it and kept going. Then she looked up from the seam, straight at him. "Whatever you are," she said, "you are not what she said in that hallway. And in this room, nobody is going to call you anything except your name." He sat still and watched her hands move. For most of his adult life, every person who had ever done anything for him had known exactly what he was worth. His board knew, his lawyers knew, women at fundraisers knew to the decimal. The number walked into a room ahead of him and sat down at the table. This woman was under a roof she could not afford to fix, spending her own thread and her own hour on a coat belonging to a man she believed did not own a second one. She finished the seam, tied it off, and bit the thread. The tear was gone. In its place was a line of black stitches, uneven, tight, obvious. He put the coat on. He looked down at the shoulder for a while.
Then he looked up at her and nodded once, slowly, and Nora went red and turned around and did something unnecessary to the kettle. Later, she took a wool blanket out of the closet and spread it over the single bed and flattened the pillow with the side of her hand. "That one is yours." He shook his head and pointed at the couch. "You are a guest under my roof." She was already lying down with a thin gray sheet pulled up to her chin. "The couch has a good side. I know where it is. You do not." The freight line put a train through at midnight, and the window buzzed in its frame. He lay awake in a single bed in a room above a laundromat and did the arithmetic he had been avoiding for 11 nights. He owned 40 hospitals. Nobody had ever given him a bed. She came in at 6:30 in the morning with the cold still on her coat, and by 7, she was asleep on the couch with one arm hanging off it and her shoes still on. Silas took the shoes off. He set them side by side under the couch, and he put the wool blanket over her, and he let himself out. The all-night diner across from the hospital had 4 booths along the window and a counter with nobody at it. He took the back booth and put his hood up. Harriet Vogel sat down across from him at 10, in a charcoal suit, and set a hard-backed folder on the table between the sugar caddy and the napkins. She had been his chief of staff for 19 years. She was 60 years old. She wore rimless glasses, and she had never in 19 years softened a sentence for him, which was the entire reason she still had the job. 98%, she said. Delivered and acknowledged. That is the certified figure for 4 quarters running. It is signed off by the review desk, and it goes into the annual report with my initials 3 pages away from it. And the referrals? Up. Every quarter. The same 4 quarters. She said it without any change in her face. Saint Ambrose is sending more unpaid accounts out to collection than it has ever sent. In the same year, the fund says it is clearing them at the best rate in the country. Both of those numbers come out of my own company, Silas said. They cannot both be true. No, they cannot. Acknowledged by whom? That is my question as well. She opened the folder. I went through the process line by line. There is no acknowledgement field. There is no receipt. There is no place anywhere in this workflow where a second human being confirms that money arrived. Silas turned that over. So the man says the money went out, he said. And the only person who checks whether the money went out is the man. Yes. He sat back. You know what you have, Harriet said. You have half. You have every grant this fund has ever issued, every dollar, every date, going back to the founding. What you do not have is one single piece of paper saying a balance stayed open afterward, because balances live in the recovery ledger, and the recovery ledger belongs to a contractor, and the only office that touches both is the office you are trying to catch. I am aware of what I have. Then hear the rest of it. She closed the folder and put both hands flat on the table. You were out there 11 nights calling this an operation.
It is not an operation. It is a man who cannot act, standing somewhere he can watch, telling himself that watching is a strategy. You are calling your own helplessness a plan, and it is not your money that is paying for it. He did not argue with her. He looked out the window at the ambulance bay for a while, at a driver hosing down a bumper. "Where do the two ledgers touch?" he said. "They do not. That is the design." "They touch," he turned back. "They touch at the exact second a person walks in holding a letter that says one thing in front of a screen that says another. That happens somewhere. It happens in a physical room with a physical person in it." Harriet looked at him for a moment. "The after-hours payment windows," she said slowly. "East Corridor. 9 at night to 6 in the morning. Who works it?" She took out her phone, pulled up a staffing roster, and scrolled. "Window 4, she said. Nights, 6 years. Bellamy." Silas did not move. Harriet turned the phone around and read it again herself. Then she looked at him, and then back down at the screen, and she set the phone face down on the table between the sugar caddy and the napkins. "4 days ago," she said, "you called me off a payphone on Kestrel Avenue and told me you had signed a marriage certificate, and to leave it alone." "I remember. The name on the line above yours was Bellamy." He did not say anything. "Then I will say the part you are not going to." Harriet took her glasses off. "There is exactly one person in that building who stands where your two ledgers touch. She works nights. She has worked them for 6 years. You are married to her, and she does not know what your name is worth." "No, she does not." "Are you going to tell her?" He looked at the ambulance bay again for a while, and the driver was gone, and the hose was coiled on its hook, and there was nothing out there to look at. Harriet went on for another minute about badge access and shift patterns, and he heard about a third of it. And at the end of it, he said thank you and paid for both coffees with cash. He walked back up the hill and let himself into a room above a laundromat where a woman was asleep on a lumpy couch with her shoes lined up underneath it. There was a plate on the stove with 2 fried eggs on it and a note beside it in pencil telling him to eat before it went cold. He ate it. He did not wake her up, and he did not say anything. He washed the plate and dried it and put it back on the shelf above the cups, which was not where it went. The dining room at the Halverson house had a glass chandelier with too many arms, and every plate on the table had a gold rim. It smelled like roasted fish and lemon butter. There were 2 men in gray suits at the far end who had flown in that morning, and they worked for the company buying Halverson Medical Billing. And the entire purpose of the evening was for them to see with their own eyes that the stepdaughter was married and living somewhere else. Grant Farrow arrived last, on purpose, the way he arrived everywhere. Glossy black suit, gold watch, a size too large, riding loose, which meant it had never been fitted, which meant it had been bought fast. He looked at Silas for a long moment, sitting there in the mended coat with his hands folded in his lap. "Is this him?" he said to Vivian. "Or did we let one of the loading crew in through the kitchen?" Sable laughed into her wine. "I am asking a practical question. Does he know which fork, or do we usually go straight into the bin behind the bakery?" "Grant." "I feel terrible for you," Sable said to Nora. "I do. In April, I will be on a plane, and you will be counting quarters for bread." Nora put her fork down and did not answer either of them. Grant turned to the men in gray suits, because that was where the evening's value was. "I run a relief fund," he said. "The Ward Relief Fund. Medical debt forgiveness. We take hospital balances off people who cannot pay them. I certify the grants personally. Several million a quarter through my desk, and a large tranche coming up. He let it sit. 98% delivered and acknowledged. Best rate in the country. That is my number. How do you confirm delivery? The table stopped. Nora had asked it in an ordinary voice, without heat, the way you ask a colleague a procedural question across a counter. Grant blinked at her. Sorry? Delivered and acknowledged. Acknowledged by who? Does the patient sign something, or does the hospital send you a confirmation, or is it your office that marks it? She was not being clever. She had wanted the answer for 4 years. Because I have people coming to my window with your letter in their hand and a balance still on my screen, and I have never been able to tell them which one of those 2 papers is wrong. Nobody said anything. That is not, Grant said, how the process is described. I know how it is described. I am asking who does the confirming. The compliance framework is not really a dinner subject. It is a yes or a no. Does a second person check? Vivienne set her glass down on the tablecloth with a small, definite sound. Nora, enough. And that was the end of it. And the conversation went somewhere else. And one of the men in gray suits asked about the closing date. Silas had not moved through any of it. He had come to that house to sit still for 2 hours in a torn coat. Instead, he had watched his wife, in front of 6 people, ask out loud the exact question he had spent 11 nights on a loading dock trying to find a way to ask from inside his own company. She had asked it better than he would have. She had asked it in the plainest possible words, and she had asked it because she had watched people carry both pieces of paper in the same hand, and she wanted to be able to tell the next one something true. On the walk home, she apologized to him for the dinner. He shook his head. He had known who she was since 10 o'clock that morning, and he did not tell her, and he had already worked out that he was not going to. The east corridor smelled like floor cleaner, and the vending machine down by the doors hummed to itself with nobody standing in front of it. 2 in the morning was the honest hour at a hospital payment window. Nobody came down the east corridor at 2 in the morning to ask a question they could ask at noon. They came because they had been holding something for 3 weeks and could not hold it one more day, and because at 2 in the morning there was no line and nobody they knew would see them standing in it. That Thursday, there was a line. 4 on the bench and 3 standing. The man at the front was 63 years old, in a gray canvas jacket zipped to the chin, and he had a folded envelope that had been opened and refolded enough times to go soft along the creases. His name was Curtis Lyle. He had turned wrenches on city buses for 29 years, and he had a hip that had been rebuilt in the building he was standing in. He put the letter in the steel tray and pushed it under the glass. Nora read it. The standard one. Resolved in full, no further action required. Thank you for your patience. A grant number in the upper right corner. She keyed the account. The balance came up in the middle of the screen. Whole. Exactly as it had been the day it was billed. It is still showing, she said through the speaker. He leaned closer to the glass. Showing what? The balance. All of it. But I got the letter. I know. They sent me the letter. He said it patiently, the way a man does when he assumes the problem is that he has not explained himself well enough. He turned the envelope around and pressed it flat against the plexiglass so she could see the printed lines. It says resolved. It came in the mail. That is their paper. That is not something I wrote. I believe you. Then why does the machine say I owe it? I do not know, Nora said. I am not allowed to change it after 9. The only thing I can do is run it. She ran it. The printer chattered and cut. She took the receipt out and pushed it through the tray. He held it up under the corridor light. $0. His account number, his grant number, typed into the memo line. The date, the time, down to the minute. What is this? It was not a rhetorical question. He genuinely wanted to know, and he stood there, holding it, waiting for an answer that would turn it into something. "It is a record that you were here," Nora said. He folded it into the envelope with the letter and stepped aside. And the woman behind him came up with a payment plan she wanted to change. And Nora took the next 4 in a row without looking past them. Then there was nobody in the tray light, and she looked up. Her husband was standing on the other side of the glass. She did not understand it. That was the first thing, and it lasted about 2 seconds and felt much longer. The plain refusal of the picture to make sense. He was in the brown coat, with her stitching on the shoulder. There was rain on it. He was 4th in a line she had been working for 6 years, and he had come down the east corridor, past the vending machines, and stood in it like anybody else. Silas? He crouched down for a second at the counter, out of the tray light, with one hand going into the side of his boot, and came up with a folded sheet and put it in the steel tray and pushed it under the glass. It was an account statement. Emergency department, a night in March, 1 overnight admission, and a name on it that was not any name she had ever heard. She looked up at him. He looked back and did not explain. She could have refused. There were 2 or 3 seconds in there where the word was right at the front of her mouth. He was standing in her line in the rain, with her own stitching on his shoulder, and she had told him, under her own roof, that she would take care of him. She keyed the account. The balance came up, unpaid, in full, with a referral flag on it. She could not zero it after 9. She ran the inquiry. The printer chattered and cut, and she pushed the receipt through the tray with the statement on top of it. He took both. He folded them once and put them inside his coat. Then he put 2 fingers flat on the steel tray for a moment, which was as close to thank you as he had ever gotten, and he walked back down the corridor the way he had come. She watched him go. She watched him all the way past the vending machines until the corridor took him. And then she sat down in the chair with one arm missing and looked at the spike for a while without seeing it. Her husband had stood 4 back in that line. He had watched her print a piece of paper for a bus mechanic with a rebuilt hip and hand it under the glass. And he had waited his turn, and he had asked her for one of his own. At 6 in the morning, Nora came out through the corridor door with her coat over her arm. Curtis Lyle was still in the vestibule, sitting on the radiator cover, looking at his receipt. She walked him to the stop on Kestrel Avenue. The night bus ran every 40 minutes at that hour, and he had missed one, so they stood under the shelter with the rain coming in sideways at their ankles. He had the envelope out again, and he turned the receipt over and looked at the blank side of it. "If I lose this one," he said. "Could you print it twice?" "I can print it as many times as you want." "Then do 2 next time." He put it away. "1 for me, and 1 for whoever ends up asking." When the bus came, she found out he did not have fare, and she gave him hers, and then she walked the 1.5 miles home in the dark. The apartment was warm. He was on the couch with his boots off and his eyes closed, and she knew perfectly well he was not asleep. "You were at my window." He did not open his eyes. There was a name on that statement. It was not yours. Nothing. Nora stood in the middle of the room in her coat, with her keys still in her hand, and she was so tired that the anger could not get all the way up, and what came out instead was smaller and worse. "I am not going to ask you again," she said. "But I want you to know I noticed." She went to bed. Behind her, on the couch, Silas Ward lay in the dark and took the 2 receipts out from inside his coat. He could not read them in that light. He held them for a while with his thumb over the place where the numbers were, and then he folded them again and put them back. The east corridor at 11:30 smelled like the wax they put down at 9 and the coffee from the machine on 3. Ray Duffy came down it 2 nights later with a cup in each hand and stopped outside window 4, the way he stopped there most nights, one shoulder against the frame. He looked past her at the spike. "That thing. I know. It is a fire load, Nora. 4 years on an open paper spike. If the safety officer walks a night shift, he writes me up, not you. He has never walked a night shift." Ray pushed one of the coffees through the tray. He was 51, and he had been on nights since his knees went. And he was not a cruel man. He was a tired one. And tired men enforce rules, because rules weigh less than judgment. "It is trash," he said.
It is a stack of zeros. She took the coffee. "Ray, can I ask you something?" "You can ask." "When somebody comes to this window with a letter that says the fund resolved their balance, and my screen shows the balance sitting there in full, which of those 2 is wrong?" He drank his coffee. "That is not a window question. This is the only window that gets asked it." "Then tell him to call the number on the letter in the morning." "They do call. They come back the next week and say nobody picked up, and the screen still says the same thing. And a month later, I stop seeing them, and I have never once found out whether that means it got fixed or whether it means they gave up." She put her hand flat on the counter beside the spike. "I have 4 years of them, Ray. That is what that is. It is not zeros. It is a list of every person who was told it was handled." Ray looked at the spike again. Something went across his face and did not stay. "Above my grade," he said, and went back down the corridor. The complaint came in at the end of that shift. The Human Resources office on the 3rd floor had a radiator under the window that ticked twice and then went quiet, and a view of the top deck of the parking structure. The woman behind the desk had a single sheet in front of her, and she read from it instead of paraphrasing, which was how Nora knew it was going to be bad. Halverson Medical Billing Group had filed a formal grievance against a night cashier at window 4. "On the evening of the 4th, the woman read, in a private setting, the employee made repeated statements impugning the integrity of the fund's certification process in front of third parties, including representatives of a commercial counterparty." Nora sat very still. "That was a dinner," she said. "That was my stepmother's dining room." "It says a private setting." "I asked a question about a process. I asked it once." There is a second paragraph. The woman turned a page over. "It also alleges that the employee has obstructed recovery by advising account holders that active balances are disputed and by generating unauthorized transaction records." Unauthorized transaction records? The $0 inquiries. I am the only person permitted to run those. It is the only thing the terminal allows after 9. I am reading you what was filed. The woman squared the page. Halverson is the contracted recovery vendor for this facility. A vendor grievance goes to compliance, and compliance came back with a recommendation this morning. 30 days, unpaid, pending review. I need your badge. Nora looked at the sheet upside down on the desk, at the letterhead with the gray letters, and understood that her stepmother had signed it, and that her stepmother had almost certainly not read past the first line, because her stepmother did not read things. She authorized them.
My aunt is on 4, Nora said. That is not part of this. I know it is not. I am telling you anyway. She unclipped the badge and put it on the desk. It made a small, flat sound on the laminate.
They walked her out at 6 because the paperwork had to be logged by a supervisor, and Ray did not come on until 9. So it happened in the last hour of the night, in the east corridor, with a security officer half a step behind her. There were 5 people waiting outside window 4. There always were. One of them, a woman in a quilted coat with an envelope in her lap, looked up as Nora went past. Miss Bellamy? Nora got as far as the vending machines before she trusted her face.
She climbed the 2 flights at 7 in the morning, 3 hours earlier than she should have, with no badge clipped to her coat. Silas was awake. He was sitting on the end of the couch with a rag and 1 boot, and he looked up when the door opened, and his eyes went to her collar where the badge went, and then back to her face. He did not ask. Long one, she said. She hung her coat on the hook, and she sat down in the wooden chair, and she looked at the floor between her shoes for a while. Nothing happened. Nothing happens on nights. He watched her. She did not tell him. Not the grievance, not the 30 days, not the badge on the laminate, not the woman in the quilted coat who had used her name in a corridor where nobody used her name. She did not tell him, because he was a man who slept behind a hospital and owned 1 coat, and there was no version of telling him that did not end with him carrying something he had no way to put down. So he did not know, and she did not know either. They sat in a room above a laundromat at 7 in the morning, 4 feet apart, each of them holding a thing they had decided the other one was better off not carrying, and neither of them said a word about it. Down the hill, behind the hospital, the corridor emptied out the way it did every morning. The light in window 4 went off at 6:30 when the day staff took over the counter, and the steel spike stayed where it had stood for 4 years, upright in its block of wood on the inside of a door she no longer had a badge to open. The window over the freight line rattled in its frame every time a train went through, and a train went through at 1/4 every hour. Ray Duffy called on the Thursday. They are clearing the booth tomorrow, he said. New terminal, new chair, whole rebuild. Anything of yours goes in a bin. I am suspended, Ray. I cannot badge in. I can badge you in. I have to stand there while you do it. 10 minutes. The east corridor at 4 in the afternoon looked wrong to her. Same lights, but there were people in it. Families, a man pushing a floor polisher, and she had spent 6 years in that hallway when it was empty. Ray unlocked window 4 and stood in the doorway with his arms folded. She took the mug. She took the gray cardigan off the back of the chair. She took the photograph she had taped inside the cabinet door, the one of Ruth on the porch on Kestrel Avenue. Before. Then she stood in front of the counter and looked at the spike. A steel rod in a block of wood. The roll on it was as thick as her wrist at the base, and it fanned out at the top where the newest ones had not compressed yet. She lifted the whole thing off. The paper came away in one dense coil, heavier than it looked, and she wound it around her hand and pushed it down into a plastic grocery bag from her coat pocket. Ray watched her do it. That is trash, Nora. Then it does not matter if I take it. He did not answer. He looked at the roll in the bag, and then he looked away down the corridor toward the vending machines for a while, at nothing in particular. 10 minutes is up, he said. She walked out past him with the bag in her hand. She knew exactly what she had done. There was a review at the end of 30 days, and a chance of going back. And there was no version of walking out of a locked booth with hospital transaction records in a grocery bag that survived a review. Whatever she was now, she was not a night cashier at Saint Ambrose. She had not asked anyone's permission. There was nobody to ask. Her final check cleared on the Friday. 2 weeks and a shift differential. On Saturday evening, she walked 3 blocks over to Fell Street, to the second-hand men's shop with the yellow sign that had a letter out. It smelled like clean cotton and pressing steam. Saul Braverman was 78, and he came out from behind the counter wiping his glasses on his apron. "Something for your father?" "My husband."
She was still not used to the word in her own mouth. "There is a party tomorrow night. A big room. I want him to walk in looking like he belongs in it." Saul went along the rack. "Black," he said. "Black is the easiest thing to be right in." He took one down and held it out on the hanger. "What is his size?" Nora opened her mouth and stopped. She did not know. She had never asked. She had washed his shirt twice, and she had never once looked at the collar tag. So she used her hands. She held them apart at the width of his shoulders, out past her own. She put one flat above her head to show how tall. She made a shape in the air for the depth of his chest, and she said he was built like a man who used to load things for a living. Saul Braverman watched her hands do it, and something went soft around his eyes, and he did not say what he was thinking. He went all the way to the back of the rack and came out with a jacket that was too big everywhere, except the shoulders, where it was still 4 fingers wide. "Take it," he said. "It will hang on him. The shoulder you can bring in." "I can bring it in? You have a needle?" "I have a needle." She paid with the last of the check and carried it home in a plastic garment sleeve over her arm, held out away from her body so it would not drag on the wet pavement. The grocery bag was on the shelf over the stove where she had put it down the afternoon she walked out of the booth, and it had not moved since. She stood in the doorway with the sleeve over her arm and looked at it. Twice that week she had lifted it off the shelf to take it down to the bins, and twice she had put it back, and she could not have told anybody what stopped her either time. At the kitchen table, at 2 a.m, she took the shoulder in by hand. She had no machine. She turned the jacket inside out, pinned the seam, and worked it with a doubled black thread. And every 10 stitches, she stopped and flattened it under her thumb to check the line. She knew it would show. There is no way to hand take a shoulder seam on a jacket you did not make and have it not show. She could watch it happening, a slight pucker, a row of black running not quite parallel to the machine line beside it. She finished it anyway. She heard the bathroom door and looked up. He came out in it, and the jacket was tight across the shoulders, and the trousers stopped a little high on the boot. And he stood in the middle of that small room and did not look like a man who slept behind a hospital. Then he spoke. "Nora." Her hands went still on the table. The voice was low, and it came from further down in the chest than she had braced for, and it filled that room in a way nothing about him had done in 3 weeks. "The bag on the shelf," he said. "The one you brought back." She could not answer immediately. "How many are on it?" 84, she said. He closed his eyes for a second. "You counted them." "I counted the first year. After that, I just added." She stood up from the table, with the needles still in her hand. "How do you know what is in that bag?" "Because I stood in your line," he said. "You printed one for me. And you put it on the spike the way a person does something they decided about a long time ago. They are worthless."
No. He said it flatly, without decorating it, and it went through her like cold water. Whatever happens tomorrow night, he said, that roll is not trash. It is the only place in this city where the two halves of a lie are written down next to each other. Nora stood there, in a room above a laundromat, holding a needle. You have been able to talk this entire time? Yes. Why? Because people hear my voice before they see me, he said. And I needed a while where nobody did. Nora looked down at the needle in her hand. She set it on the table, point turned away from her, and squared it against the edge of the wood with one finger, and left it there. One thing for tomorrow, he said. What? Whatever they say to you, do not look at the floor. She turned off the lamp and lay down on the couch and pulled the gray sheet up to her chin. In the dark, she heard him work 2 fingers down inside the lining of the brown coat. Then a small sound, 3 notes going up, that had not been in that apartment in 3 weeks. Then his voice, very low, saying a name she did not know, to somebody who had picked up on the first ring. She did not ask him the other question. She did not ask why a count of worthless paper was the thing a man would break 3 weeks of silence to find out. There was a board on a brass easel by the elevators in the lobby of the Paladine, with the day's rooms printed on it in white plastic letters. Nora walked past it, holding a plastic grocery bag, and did not read a word of it. The Rosewood Room was 200 feet long with a gold ceiling, and it smelled like lilies and roast beef. 400 people. Waiters going sideways through the gaps with trays held flat above their shoulders. A 6-piece band on a low stage under an arch of white flowers. She wore a dark red dress she had owned for years. He wore Saul Braverman's jacket with the shoulder she had taken in at 2 a.m. She had come to do one thing. The 2 men in gray suits were near the bar with Vivian. Nora had worked it out on the walk over. Get to the corner of the bar, put the bag on it, take out the top 11, and ask her stepmother in front of the buyers to explain how 84 accounts could be certified as paid and referred for collection in the same month. She had said it under her breath twice on Kestrel Avenue. She had it in order. She got about 30 feet into the room. Sable saw them from the stage. She had been up there 20 minutes with Grant, receiving people. And her face changed the way a face changes when a much better idea arrives. She turned and took the microphone out of the band leader's hand. The feedback went across the room like a hand across a table. 400 people stopped talking. Everybody, look at the door. Heads turned. My little sister got married last month, and none of you were invited, so allow me. She let it sit for exactly the right length of time. This is the man she found behind the hospital. Somebody laughed, then more. No, be kind, be kind. Sable put her hand on her chest. She dressed him up. Look at him. She got him a suit. She tilted her head and squinted from the stage. Oh, honey, did you sew that yourself? The laugh came up properly then. 400 people, a wall of it, and it hit and rolled and did not stop for a while. Nora stood in it. The heat went up her neck and into her face, and she made herself keep her chin level, because a man in a mended coat had told her one thing, and that was the thing. Then Sable looked down at the card in her other hand. It was in her own handwriting, copied off a sheet with gray letterhead that had been sitting face up on her mother's hall table all week. Actually, while I have everybody, there is a charity element to this evening. Vivian was 6 feet away and did not move. Sable read the account number out loud, then the name on it, Ruth Bellamy, and then the outstanding balance, to the dollar. "That is my aunt's hospital bill," she said. "Anybody want to chip in?" The room laughed harder. Nora heard it from somewhere slightly outside her own body. 2 miles north, on the 4th floor, a woman who could not swallow thin liquids was asleep under a note in a nurse's handwriting. And 400 people in evening clothes were laughing at what it cost to keep her there. Something went out of her all at once and left something colder behind. She opened the bag. The coil came out and unwound down her arm and hung there. 4 years of it. And she found the top and held it up and started to read. Curtis Lyle, account ending 417. Relief fund grant issued the 11th of March. $0 applied. "What is she doing?" somebody said. Deborah Mackey, grant issued the 2nd of April. $0 applied. Nobody stopped her. Nobody reacted. That was the part she had not prepared for, and it was worse than the laughing. Harold Amos Reyes, grant issued the 19th of April. $0 applied. The laughter began to come apart. Some of it kept going out of habit, and some of it stopped, and the two halves rubbed against each other and made a sound like nothing at all. Alma Petrosian, grant issued on the 9th of May. $0 applied. Grant Farrow lifted his hand off the stage rail and made a small circle with 2 fingers. 3 men in black suits came off the wall by the doors and started across the floor. They did not hurry. That was the worst of it. They came in an unhurried curve, the way people move when they have done this many times and know the crowd will open. And the crowd opened and closed behind them. Nora took a step forward to put herself in front of him. Silas took her by the shoulder and moved her behind his back and stepped out to meet the 3 of them. Alone. He had still not said one word in that room. The double doors at the west end of the Rosewood room did not open quietly. They came back against the wall hard enough that the sound went up into the gold ceiling and came down again. And 400 people turned away from the man in the cheap suit to look at the doorway. Harriet Vogel came through first. Charcoal suit, hard-backed folder under her left arm, walking the way a person walks who has been in the building since 4 o'clock. Behind her came 11 more. They came in 2 loose rows, dressed for a boardroom and not a party, and one of them still had a lanyard on. The 3 men in black suits stopped in the middle of the floor, put their hands down, and stepped back without being told. Harriet crossed the room. She did not look at the stage. She did not look at Vivian Halvorsen, or at the 2 men in gray suits, or at 400 guests. She stopped 3 paces short of the man in the mended jacket. The woman at the front of the second row was 67 years old. Her name was Della Rothman, and she had chaired the board of Ardennes Standard Health for 9 years. She took her reading glasses off, folded them, and held them at her side. Then she bowed her head. All 11 did it at once, and they held it, and it went on longer than anybody in that room was comfortable with. It was a company custom. Ardennes Standard had been founded out of a charity infirmary by a man who wrote it into the first charter, and every chief executive since had held the standing option to strike it. None of them ever did, including the current one, who had always found it faintly ridiculous and had never once been on the receiving end of it in a room full of strangers. Sable's mouth was open. "Mother!" Her voice came out much higher than she meant it to, and the microphone was still live, and it went out across the whole room. "Mother, why is Harriet Vogel bowing to a beggar?" Silas Ward straightened up. It took about a second and a half. The set of the shoulders went. The tucked chin went. The whole careful, low posture of a man who does not want to be looked at came off him like a coat, and he stood to his full height in a jacket that was slightly too small. "My name is Silas Ward." The room did not make any sound at all. Ardane Standard Health owns this hospital. It owns 39 others. He turned his head slightly. "Mrs. Halverson, your recovery contract is with me." Vivian put one hand on the back of a gold chair. "For 11 nights, I slept on the loading dock behind Saint Ambrose. Then I stood in the line at the after-hours window like anybody else, because two numbers in my own company could not both be true, and I could not run a query inside my own building without the wrong office seeing it." He did not take the jacket off. There was no case, no garment bag, nobody waiting at his elbow with anything folded over an arm. He stood there in second-hand black with a hand-taken shoulder seam showing, and he looked at the woman in the dark red dress. "4 days after I signed that certificate," he said, "I found out where my wife worked. I did not tell her. She has been carrying the answer to this in a grocery bag for a week, and she found out what was in it at 2 o'clock this morning." He put his hand out toward her, palm up. Nora gave him the roll. He found the top of the coil, turned it until he had the one he wanted, and read it out in a flat voice that carried to the back of the room. Curtis Lyle, 63 years old. Account ending 417. He came to that window at 2 in the morning, holding a letter from the Ward Relief Fund that told him his balance was resolved in full. The system showed it open. The inquiry? Printed at 2:14. He looked up. Harriet. Harriet Vogel opened the hard-backed folder. "Grant 417-C, she read. "Ward Relief Fund. Issued and certified by reviewer Grant Farrow. Amount dispersed. Status: delivered and acknowledged." Delivered to whom? Not to the account. Silas held the roll out sideways, without looking away from the stage, and put it back into his wife's hands. "Keep going," he said. And Nora Bellamy, who had spent 6 years being a face behind scratched plexiglass in a corridor that nobody photographs, stood in the middle of the Rosewood room in a dress she had owned for years, and read out the next name. Harriet answered it. Nora read the one after that. Harriet answered that one too. They got 11 deep before anybody in that room moved a foot. 84 grants, certified as delivered and acknowledged. 84 balances still standing open on the night the person walked in with the letter in their hand. The same account numbers, the same grant numbers, the same reviewer on every single one. Grant Farrow was still up on the stage. He had set the microphone down on the piano at some point, and nobody had seen him do it. 2 people came up the side steps. There was one sentence. He went down off the stage and out through the service door beside the kitchen. No glass table. No smashed vases. 9 seconds. And most of the room only worked out that it had happened because the space where he had been standing was empty. At the door, he turned around. "Who reported it?" he said. Nobody answered him. The answer was standing 30 feet away in a dark red dress with 4 years of paper wound around her hand, reading the next name. By 11:30, the lilies on the stage had gone soft at the edges, and the whole room smelled like cold roast beef. The Rosewood room was mostly chairs. The band had packed up without being asked. At the far end, the waiters were stacking glasses onto a rolling cart and being careful not to make noise with them. The fund's outside counsel was a thin man named Peter Sandoval, who had come down from the 4th floor with the board, and had not sat down once. He was working a list on a legal pad at one of the abandoned tables. He got to an item and looked up. "There is a recording," he said. "Municipal building, second floor corridor, last month. Publicly posted." It shows the family filming this man's shoes at close range and inviting an audience to guess where he was found. He made a mark. "I want it preserved. It goes to whether the household understood that the person they put a signature in front of had no way to push back." Sable Halverson was sitting on the edge of the stage with her shoes off. She looked down at the phone in her hand. It was still going. She had opened it when she took the microphone, the way she opened it for everything, and she had never closed it. The counter in the corner had a number on it larger than any number she had ever put up in her life. She looked at it for a second. Then she turned the phone face down on her knee and switched it off. Harriet Vogel set a file box on the table in front of Vivian Halverson, a standard transfer box, and it was full. 84 buff folders standing on their edges with the tabs sticking up. "Referral packets," Harriet said. "Ward Relief Fund to Halverson Medical Billing. Every one of these is an account your company took into recovery after the fund had already certified the balance resolved. Your signature is on the receipt sheet for each transfer. All 84. Vivian did not touch the box. "I have never taken a dollar that was not billed." "That is true," Harriet said. "It is why there is no officer from the district attorney standing behind me. You did not steal anything." She squared the box on the table with 2 fingers. "You just never opened one." "There are 900 a month." "Yes." The recovery contract was terminated that night by notice, effective immediately. It was 80% of the revenue of Halvorsen Medical Billing Group. The 2 men in gray suits had left during the reading, quietly, one after the other. And by Tuesday, the sale was dead, and the name on the building on Fell Street belonged to a company with nothing left to do. When the room was empty, Vivian was still sitting there. She pulled the box toward her, took out the folder at the front, and opened it. She had never opened one. In 11 years of running that company, she had signed for them, batched them, staffed them, priced them, and audited the margin on them. And she had never once opened a folder and read a name. The name on the first one was Ruth Bellamy. The service corridor behind the Rosewood room had catering racks along one wall and a mop sink at the end, and one light in a wire cage. "When did you know?" Nora said. "The 4th day." "Say the rest of it." "Harriet read me a staffing roster in a diner at 10 in the morning. Window 4, nights, 6 years, Bellamy." He did not look away while he said it. "I had signed your certificate 4 days before that, and I had no idea what I was signing. Then I walked back up the hill and ate the eggs you left on the stove and said nothing. 3 weeks. 3 weeks. You slept in my bed." Her voice was very level, and it was costing her. "You wore a coat I sewed, and the whole time you knew that the thing on that spike was the only piece of it anybody had, and you let me keep thinking it was trash, because a woman who thinks she is holding trash does not hand it to anyone." "Yes. Do not agree with me like that. I am not agreeing with you to get out of it. That is what I did." She turned away and looked at the mop sink for a while. "Curtis Lyle," she said. "Yes. You crouched down at my counter that night and put your hand inside your boot." She was watching his face, and she did not stop. "What else was down there?" He did not look away. $420 in cash. The mop sink dripped once at the end of the corridor and did not drip again.
"He walked to Kestrel in the rain," she said. "He did not have the fare." "I know. I watched you give him yours." "Then say the reason, out loud, to me." "If I had pulled $400 out of a boot at that window at 2 in the morning, somebody makes a phone call before the shift ends." He said it with no lift in it at all, which was somehow worse. "By the end of that week, every file that mattered is gone, and Pharaoh is running the same thing out of a different desk in a different state." I decided one man would go home without an answer so that 84 would get one. "And you would do it again?" "I do not know," he said. "That is the honest one. I have gone over it every night since, and I still do not know." Nora put her hand flat against the tile behind her. "I am going to need some time with that. I know. I am not saying it to punish you. I know that too." He offered her the fund. He offered it standing in that corridor, with the noise of glasses being stacked coming through the wall, and he meant it, and it was not a gesture. Director of the Ward Relief Fund, effective whenever she wanted it, with the authority to rebuild the whole thing from the intake form up. Then he offered to write a check that night and take Ruth Bellamy's account down to nothing before the building changed shifts. Nora said no twice. "Run her file back through the fund," she said, "the same way you were going to run the other 83. She qualified 4 years ago. She was approved 4 years ago. Somebody turned it over. I do not want her fixed faster than the rest of them, because she is mine. And the directorship. No. Nora, you cannot see anything from up there." She said it without heat, the way a person states the location of a wall. "You had every grant this fund has ever issued, and it still took you 11 nights on a loading dock, and you only found it because you finally went and stood in the one place where the 2 pieces of paper end up in the same hand. That is not a boardroom. That is a window." He looked at her for a long moment. "Then tell me what you want." She told him. It was so small that he had to ask her to say it again. 3 things happened, and they can be counted. 84 denied and diverted grants were rerun and applied, and the letters that went out the second time carried one added line, telling people to bring the letter to a window and watch the balance change on the screen while they stood there. The outside recovery contract was not retendered. It was ended, and the roll-down shutter on window 4 stopped coming down at midnight. Ruth Bellamy kept her bed on the 4th floor. Her file went back through the fund with the other 83, in the order it arrived, and Nora stood in the line at her own old window to hand it in, behind a man with a cast on his arm and a woman holding a paper sack. 2 in the morning, 4 weeks later. The east corridor past the vending machines. The floor stopped being tile and became sealed concrete, and the lights hummed at a slightly different pitch, and there was no music down there, and nobody was talking. 2 hands came up and took hold of the chain. The steel shutter of window 4 went up, all the way, past where it used to stop, and the hook went into the eye at the top and held. Inside the booth, there was a new spike in a new block of wood, and there was one receipt on it that she had not printed. $0. An overnight admission in March under the name August Ward, who founded a charity infirmary in this city a very long time ago and wrote one strange custom into its charter. At the far end of the corridor, back where the light did not reach, a man stood in a second-hand black jacket with a hand-sewn shoulder. He did not come any closer. He had not been asked to yet. Curtis Lyle walked out of the dark and into the square of light in his gray canvas jacket,
and he took a folded envelope out of his pocket and put it down in the steel tray.
The hands stayed flat on the counter on either side of the tray. They did not move until he was finished. If there is somebody in your life who keeps the records nobody ever thanks them for, put their name in the comments. We read them. And we will see you on the next one.